Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you want me to go through all 16 bills?
I mean, honestly, if I'm honest, the truth is it's hard for me to imagine you coming here today and saying, I have not read all the bills that were brought in front of you by this body. That is actually really is frustrating to me as a legislator that took those bills very seriously. And like I said, I supported so many of them. So I mean,
I apologize for that.
I know it was a smart remark, but it's
not.
In all honesty, yeah. I mean, I would have expected that from this procedure. I just would have.
I am so underwater on a daily basis, and having spent my first year as president trying to figure out how to work with the other commissioners, this is really the first year that I've thought long and hard about how I'm going to work with the legislature. So I say that, and I apologize to you, because it's true. I don't think I had the familiarity that I would try to have this year on the bills.
Fair enough.
So I'm not doing it to blow you off. I'm just being honest.
All right, fair enough.
Okay, let's go to Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Picker, appreciate you being here, and I want to associate with the comments of the other members here. And we don't need to go through them, but Member Burke and Member Quirk, Obernolte, Member Hadley. I want to also commend the chair for the really significant hearing, I think, on 380. It really was a hearing. It really was an informed opportunity for us to get into safety and reliability. So I just want to touch briefly on your February 1st letter. You, Chair Weisenmiller, President Berberich said there is good reason to be concerned that reliability of supply may be critical for electrical generators in the LA Basin, especially LADWP. The February 16th preliminary staff report stated that Aliso Canyon storage is the only source available to meet the gas supply needed for gas-fired electric generation in Los Angeles Basin during summer months and all of that. Do you have an addendum to this letter, given time passing, given the thoroughness of the hearing, and given the fundamental question, do we have enough flexibility and understanding that we can handle safety and we can still make sure that we do not go dark in LA?
Well, there are always going to be challenges. I'll just kind of sketch out the context and tell you a little bit about what I think, and then report to you what our next steps are. So first, Aliso Canyon is an important part of the infrastructure. It's sort of at the far end of many of the gas pipelines. It serves two important functions. The pipes that come into the Southern California area carry about 3.7 billion cubic feet per day at peak capacity. Now, not every pipeline is operating at peak capacity every day. And during portions of the winter, demand for natural gas is about 5.7 billion cubic feet. And so you can see that the pipes won't bring enough gas into the LA basin to meet the needs of LA residential and industrial consumers. In the winter, 60% of the gas is used for heating and cooling, primarily by residential small commercial customers. In the summer, it reverses. 60% of the gas goes to provide peaking capacity for the late afternoons and during the heat storms to be able to run electricity into the wires to help people cool. So we went through a similar drill when we lost the San Onofre nuclear generating station, and it was a very focused multi-agency effort for a couple of years to be able to make sure that people's energy needs were met. It's not simply the electricity or the gas itself sometimes it's the capacity. And so without having access to that capacity can be a challenge. Summer is a little more complicated. So, for example, a significant portion of the gas that's used for generation goes to LADWP. Now, LADWP's electrical grid is separate from the rest of the state's electric grid, and it actually, portions of it operate on a lower voltage. So it might be feasible, for example, to weather the summer on the larger integrated system operator grid, because they can draw resources from different places. LADWP is a little more isolated, and there's a couple of their gas plants that get much of their gas primarily as a result of gas coming in and then going out of Aliso Canyon. So for them, summer is probably more critical. The challenge is in the winter. Now, there are things that we can do, and in April 8th, we plan to hold a workshop to talk about our initial liability plan, and should be holding that workshop, I believe, in Woodland Hills. So that will give people a snapshot of what are the available tools, how much can we rely on them for, what will we be doing to work with consumers and with other agencies to help provide reliability? What will we be ordering the utilities to do? So that's a snapshot. Was that?
Okay, appreciate that. I'd like an answer about preference here. In light of the uncertainties, your letter, our staff report, the testimony at the 380 hearing, and the general concern by members with respect to safety and reliability, particularly with manufacturing and industry and the ports and all of the economic considerations. What is your preference here? Would you rather put into statute the moratorium on injections that and production via SB 380? Instead of simply doing it by the executive order, does the bill unnecessarily tie the hands of agencies? Should reliability become a real concern this summer? Do you have a preference? Legislate it, or allow the governor with his executive authority and emergency declaration manage it from that standpoint?
Well, we're an executive agency, so I'm going to always hold for executive authority. But on the other hand, if the legislature acts, then we'll do our best to meet your requirements. I will say that a multi-agency effort that's coordinated by the governor's office is putting together response to some of the questions that are raised by 380. I'm not the lead on that, so I don't want to speak for them. And it's in the nature of legislative negotiations that there's back and forth, so I don't even want to guess where it is currently. But I do think that we treat that as a serious effort by the legislature to try to raise questions, and we're trying to respond to Senator Pavley.
Well, I don't know if there's a category for the vote that I cast on it. It's not yet. But I am concerned about whether or not there is the kind of flexibility to manage multi-agency, to do it in such a way that is safe, but also has some kind of discretion to be able to see the warning signs and to engage in utilizing the supply and others opportunities to manage the grid in ways. I am concerned about the browning and the blackout of particularly industrial and commercial and port and all of that. The port slowdown alone cost Central California literally billions of dollars. Oh, yeah. I can imagine, or I don't want to imagine what would happen to our exports. Obviously, if we had a reliability issue that browned operations or slowed operations at the ports.
A 13-hour blackout in San Diego County that was caused by confusion between three different balancing areas in the West, two of them in California, cost the industry of and consumers of San Diego over $120 million. Only 13 hours. So I share your concern. I will just tell you that while we want to engage seriously with the legislature, and I'm becoming much more active in the process, and that's why I can speak more coherently to this than I can to last year's packages. I'm assuming that it's going to be our responsibility, along with the CECs and the ISO and the ARB, to deal with this.
Yeah. I think you assume correctly. Just if I may jump in on this really quickly, because we held a very extensive hearing on this just a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that came out was that it was very apparent that very few people within government had answers to the questions that we wanted. And the questions were very threshold, they were very basic, and I dare say they were ones that any responsible government regulator would ask. Things like, what is the peak usage of the Los Angeles County Basin? If you take its worst day, where the weather happens to be 110, and there's a good basketball game on, and you take the worst day and you add the natural gas demand for that day, and you imagine that we have a string of those. We have 310-degree days and so on and so forth. What does this do for reliability? And you could hear crickets in our last hearing on that question.
I'm sorry, I had a commission meeting that day.
Yeah, and
otherwise I would have been happy to tell you all my fears and hopes.
Well, I think we have several of the same fears. I mean, we're just a bunch of dumb lawmakers, and it's hard for us sometimes to get scientific data. But from what we've been able to determine is that we have supplies for just about 10 days, of peak demand in the summer in Southern California if something were to go wrong. So that is
I think
very concerning.
I think that there's that buffer of 15 billion cubic feet, and we didn't have to draw on it during this winter so far, which was one of our concerns. So we go into the summer with that 15 billion cubic feet buffer. We know that there are certain programs that we can deploy this summer that reduce electric demand. There's all the interruptible programs for demand response. There's the normal flex your power programs, which deliver very well for short heat storms. We used them pretty heavily during the outage at San Onofre. So I think that there are tools, and what we will have by the 8th, I hope, is at least an initial package and some sense of what kinds of events. What I always worry about is that summer is when you normally take the gas pipelines down for maintenance and rely on ELISA. Winter is when you keep the gas pipelines up, but then you can take your gas generators down for repairs. So that, for me, is the big issue. What are the contingencies that it's almost impossible to plan for? A failed compressor. So we have people out looking, doing exactly what we did for San Onofre, making sure that all the infrastructure is capable of serving through the summer, and then we'll go into similar preparation sometime late summer for winter.
Well, I view this as an opportunity, right? The regulatory system in California has let down a lot of people. A lot of people in Porter Ranch feel let down. They're a little disappointed, and I know there's other parts of the state that feel the same way. But here's an opportunity where we're sitting here months before the hottest season. We're sitting here and we're identifying together the things that could go wrong. I think now it's up to you, and I think what the committee is trying to say is that it's up to you to pleasantly surprise the public and to do this right, to handle this right, so that this region doesn't suffer brownouts in addition to tons of methane being spewed into the air.
Well, I'm actually very glad to be sitting here today, and people are saying that this is not a repeat of the blackouts that occurred after the San Onofre nuclear power plant went away, because this is exactly what we did then. And I'd like to be optimistic and say that it probably worked here, but again, I think through every contingency I possibly can and try to figure out what we can do. So does Bob Weissenmiller from the California Energy Commission. So does the team at the ISO. And we talked to the ARB about what things that they can allow us to do in that worst case. So we have plans A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V.
Okay, all right. We're going to go to one more question from Mr. Patterson, then we have to open it up for public comment, and then we'll have some last comments from members of the committee. Thank you.
CPUC, this is about the Kerman rate matter. I'm assuming you're familiar with it and understand the details. And
Only that I know that it's a horrible screw-up on our part.
Okay. Obviously, rate case filed in 2011. There has been an interim decision, apparently, $1 million over 12 installments. I think the problem is it hasn't gotten to the kind of finalized decision that a company can rely on, because that interim rate decision is subject to true-up and possible refund. I don't know how you spend the resources under those kinds of constraints. So I think we really need a decision. So it really goes to a repeated concern about really a delayed decision is essentially a denied decision, and that to have processes that cause layoffs, for example. Kerman has laid off 5 employees. They've spent $1 million in attorney's fees. And so we heard also now that the administrative law judge promised a decision on 2015 and left, disappeared. The legislature tried to address this in 1693 in 2014 that required the PUC to issue a final decision on a general rate case of a small independent telephone corporation no later than 330 days following the corporation's initial filing. Governor Brown vetoed that, but his veto message said, "I am directing the California Public Utilities Commission to address the concerns of the proponents and to create a rate case plan to encourage timely completion of these rate cases." Has the governor's directive been carried out?
No. Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. I do appreciate your very clear and crisp and forceful answer. I would have appreciated, and I think other members would have appreciated, the similar kind of clarity, forcefulness, directness with some of the more complicated matters. But I do understand you have busy days, lots of work. I do want to commend you for laying awake night and thinking if there are possibilities of taking out from the jurisdiction and the oversight and the control of PUC some of the concerns and some of the issues raised by Member Openulty and others. So dream on.
I will say that these 10 small phone companies that we actually set rate for actually are an example of the kind of absolute chaos that we face in terms of what we're supposed to do. If, in fact, we're setting rates for them, it must mean that there is some part of the landline market that's not competitive. And so it's just, I can't quite wrap my head around how all this fits together and what we're supposed to do. I mean, here's a clear case where we have failed to do what it is that people are saying we probably shouldn't do, which is set rates or even examine the question whether there's a competitive market. And I'm not judging. I'm just trying to figure it out.
Terrific. We have one more question from the dais for now from Mr. Quirk, then we're going to go to public comment. Mr. Quirk.
We could have used a full day of hearings. I'm sorry that we don't have more time.
I'll come back. I'll come back.
Oh, okay. We'll do that because there's lots more here.
I'm sorry that my answers aren't very crisp. It's just, I can't help myself.
There's a number of things here. First of all, just to follow up, the chair has said we ought to rethink in his radical taking you out of the Constitution way. But nonetheless, you seem to agree we need to rethink what the priorities are, where we're going.
I've been saying that for 7 years.
Oh, good.
Everybody disagrees as to what that is, though.
Yeah, I know. All right. You said there's certainly a certain part of telecommunications you probably don't need to be involved in. I can't
tell you which part, though.
I know. Well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. You've also mentioned transportation. You mean truck transportation?
Our transportation carrier division used to have 155 people. They went out every day with the CHP. They inspected licenses and the truck tires for commercial carriers in California. They were the backbone of our transportation enforcement program. Now that's all gone away. It's been federally deregulated as interstate commerce. We don't do that anymore.
Right.
So the real question is, we have things that I can't quite wrap my head around. Party limousine.
So
why do we
let's
regulate party limousines?
Let's get back to safety again.
Okay. That's why we regulate them, I guess.
You mentioned, and I think it was before you were there, an argument, ORA trying to keep down rates and therefore not funding some safety programs. I would like to hear from ORA their side of the story if they're willing to say something in public comment.
You could speak to Turn as well. I think they do a very good job of keeping rates down. I think that they admit that their goal is to keep rates down to an acceptable level of safety. What I think is we have a one-sided conversation as to what that acceptable level is.
Well, I think that's something that the legislature should address, and I'll put it on my list.
Thank you.
The second part of it, so you've had some budget cuts that went through this year. There was about a $1.9 million planned information technology contract that was delayed due to, and it says several priority planned upgrades were not taken up. What exactly were those upgrades?
I'm going
to
give this to our Executive Director, Tim Sullivan.
Thank you, Assemblymember Quirk. I'm not completely sure. I think they were server upgrades and other contracts for maintenance of our central support computers.
Will this affect cybersecurity?
It's not related. Well, in the sense that newer servers are better and safer, yes, it obviously will. But it didn't have an explicit cybersecurity orientation.
Okay. Electrical generation reliability and safety program will be discontinued. Fund 0462, $849,000.
Yes, that was another cut that we made. That affected the inspection of generation facilities. We made that cut because we share responsibility with Cal OSHA and with the CEC. And given the need to cut our budget, we thought that would be an area which would have minimal impact on safety. We do provide safety functions when we go there. We don't have strong statutory authority to cite people, but nonetheless, when we go there, our inspectors, whenever they notice a safety issue, they address it.
So I would say here, again, it's a question of your scope of work. Does it make sense to give some other authority complete control in this area or give you complete control? I think this is a worthwhile question to ask.
In the meantime, I think our answer has to be that we have to get better at working with other state agencies. There are people who are doing this. Can we actually better understand what they do, how they do it, when they do it, what they find, so that we can discharge our duties to hold the utility accountable, as opposed to just duplicating what other agencies are already doing?
Okay. And then the electrical grid security proceeding for $348,000.
And so that was my call. I actually sat in one of the early scoping sessions for relates to plant security at substations. There are 7 critical substations throughout the state. Some of them have been physically attacked.
Right.
But as it turns out, I learned that the OES, the feds, and other agencies were on site at one of those attacks before we even actually had notification. Before dawn, they were there. And so it becomes real clear that there's a heavy national security presence doing some of this. Now, there's nobody at the CPUC who has security clearance to actually be aware of what those folks are doing, what they're finding, what they're even holding people accountable to. There are FERC and NERC standards that are national in nature for physical security of substations. And in the one of the workshops before we actually released the proceeding, there were 60 attorneys in the room. And I asked, is there anybody here who has clearances to actually know what those NERC and FERC standards are for substation security? Nobody raised their hand. I asked, is there anybody here who works for an agency where somebody has that authority? 7 people raised their hands. They are all from regulated utilities. I asked if any of them had talked to those people who had that clearance to be able to identify what the practices were that were required to comply with the federal standards. And one person raised his hands. I said, what were you told? What were you told? Are you allowed to tell us? And he says, I can't say anything. So why are we having a proceeding with 60 people where nobody can actually say what it is that we're supposed to be doing?
Those are all great questions. And it brings us back to the chair's concern and your concern about defining your agency's roles, particularly with regard to safety, which is a large part we've discussed, but also we've discussed reliability in the Los Angeles basin. And there I'm going to bring up something that probably people would rather I not say, particularly my staff, but I'm going to say it anyway. We have to look at whether or not we should be refilling the gas basin. Now, if there's a clear and present danger refilling that basin, then no. But it could be that that basin is no worse off than any of the other basins here, and the risk of a brownout or blackouts is very high. I don't know the answer. Is there a large amount of risk? There would certainly be tremendous protests if you did, but if the alternative is large-scale blackouts, it's perhaps worth it. And I'm just putting that up there.
Okay, and actually the Department of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources is tasked in the governor's executive order with actually providing an answer to that, and they're working at that. Our job is to talk to them to understand what they're doing and to be able to translate that into utility actions. But I don't think that we're going to duplicate their expertise with wells and well integrity.
No, I wouldn't expect you to.
But I do think we have to.
But I think it is. I think you would say you could be the, or perhaps it's another agency that would be the expert on whether or not an emergency is likely to take place.
And how do we actually define the interface between the CPUC and these other agencies and their expertise and their authority? And that's the challenge that I face. You may have a different solution to it. In the meantime, I got the task, and I'm not shirking it.
Well, I think we need to work together and work that out, both your own scope and then your responsibilities with other agencies.
Okay, we're going to go to public comment now because we have legislative floor session in just a little bit. So if there's any members of the public who wish to speak, please step forward. And then we'll, once you are done, we will go back to a few more questions from the dais. Oh, Mr. Picker, you can stay. Yeah, I'm sure they might have some questions for you.
Good afternoon. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Mr. Picker. Bernie Orozco with the California Cable and Telecommunications Association, representing the cable industry. I do want to sort of slightly disagree with President Picker here on the oversight of the cable industry as we attach to utility poles. The Federal Cable Act actually gives specific authority to the states to regulate how those attachments are handled. So, in fact, the California Public Utilities Code section, I looked it up really fast, 768.5 also grants that authority to the PUC. So we do comply with General Order 95. In fact, the cable industry sits on the GO 95 Rules Committee and helps develop those standards. So we are audited by the Safety and Enforcement Division if we're not complying with those safety standards, and those audit results are posted on your website. In fact, some of our cable operators have been fined by the Public Utilities Commission for those violations. So I want to make sure that committee members do not leave this room thinking that there is no jurisdiction for the PUC on safety standards for pole attachments.
Those are for the utilities who explicitly agreed to a certificate of public convenience and necessity, and we don't have citation authority for other cases where the telecommunication provider does not have a CPCN.
Well, you do for all our members. You have authority, and you have cited. I don't want to name specific cable operators, but
it'd be helpful to me because then I could go look it up.
Well, in fact, I was going to mention to our local cable provider, I will make sure to reach out to them and talk about the loose wires in your backyard that are on the SMUD pole, because we also have to comply with those safety standards on a municipal utility districts as well. So I just want to make sure.
I'm going to connect you guys offline. I'll give you guys cell phone numbers. But thank you for your comment. Thank you.
Okay,
Let's go to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Jose Perez, and I publish a magazine called Latino Journal. And one of my editorial advisory board members is David Lizarraga from the Telecu Education Foundation. And so we wanted to bring some attention to this very important committee of people. In looking at all the 9 items that you have listed on here, reminds me of the report card that my son would get when we would visit the teacher. The teacher always begins with the positives and then kind of works into the things that need to be worked on. And these are the things that, obviously you're trying to improve things, and we appreciate that. But you should be aware that as you take a look at the PUC, there's some really good things going on in there. And one that you should really be aware of is their General Order 156 administration, which deals with supplier diversity. The California Public Utilities Commission, you should be aware of, is nationally recognized for its supplier diversity programs. When the program really started, it started out of this committee, actually, when Gwen Moore was chair of this committee 28 years ago. But what that program has done is that last year it was reported there was $8.8 billion of diverse spend that went into because of the programs that are administered by the PUC, and it benefited the service-disabled veterans, which I'm sure is a very important constituency for you, women, Asians, African Americans, Latinos, American Indians, and the LGBT community. And so, as we take a look at the PUC, obviously there's always room for improvement, but we also have to appreciate the incredibly wonderful things that it's doing in California. And if you take a look at the economic development, what's going on with the business development in California, the role that they're playing is just phenomenal. And so clearly your role is to be vigilant. And so our recommendation as you go forward is, give this team of commissioners an opportunity to fix some of these, major concerns on public safety and some of these other items that obviously everyone shares with those concerns. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Chairman Gatto, members of the committee, my name is Mark Toney. I'm Executive Director of TURN, the Utility Reform Network. I have a very short list. I will be quick of comments. The first is one where I would like to commend the CPUC in progress in meeting a statutory goal, and that has to do with intervener compensation for ratepayer advocacy organizations, environmental organizations, that the CPUC has made tremendous gains in the past year in meeting the 75-day statutory requirement for responding to intervener claims. So I wanted to start off with that. Number two is on the issue of safety, TURN supports having a safety advocate, partly because safety is not just about writing a blank check to the utilities. Safety is about strategy. And we need more focus on what is the most cost-effective strategy to get safety. My third thing is on the issue of rates and designs. The reason that affordability is so important and why we do focus on that is the consequences of bills not being affordable is, for instance, in 2014, there were over 700,000 households whose utility service was shut off because they couldn't pay their bills. That's 2 million people, mostly children, California residents deprived of basic utility service. That is why affordability is so important. And my final point is that the importance of landline telephone service remains today, and the reason we support the CPUC remaining active in it is because so many seniors still rely on landline service. The 911 infrastructure in California, which is about public safety, relies on 911. A lot of people live in areas in which cell phone service is not available or not reliable. They rely on landline. And small businesses who rely on credit card readers, who have alarm systems, to this day rely on landline telephone service. So I would like you to consider those things, that until the mobile is ready to meet all of those challenges, there is still a role for landline. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Anybody else who wishes to speak? Going once, going twice. Final questions or comments from the dais? I want to welcome Mr. Ridley Thomas, who does not sit on Utilities and Commerce, but cares so much about these issues that he showed up today at this hearing. That's how engaged he is, and we thank you for being here, and go ahead with your question.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing, and we appreciate the PUC representatives for making your presentation. This is a part of the essential role of the legislature to provide oversight, and I'm simply here to learn, affirm, and be a partner in your efforts, Mr. Gatto. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll go to Mr. Obernolte for the last comments of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Picker, as we were discussing ex-party communication here, I was reflecting on the day a year ago when you sat in that chair and you were newly appointed president of the PUC, and we actually had what I found a very refreshing conversation about the culture at the PUC, and you acknowledged there was a cultural problem, that you pledged to work with the legislature and the public to restore trust in the PUC. You pledged to work towards greater transparency and greater accountability. So how's that going?
Slow. I think that my first year I was really focusing on getting the commissioners to work together and to take responsibility for the organization and to actually start to develop some tools for accountability. I think we've made progress there. Now I'm trying to actually engage with the legislature and other outside agencies to better understand how we can do a better job working with you. So I wish I could be move faster. I wish I had more hours in the day. So I'll just say that I'm now probably as much of the problem as I am the solution, simply because there's only so many things that I can put on my plate. And I think that I also will commend the other commissioners for actually stepping up. I think that last year Commissioner Peterman and Commissioner Florio actually did a pretty good job of keeping track of legislation. Commissioner Randolph and I are doing that this year. I think that we're really working hard to spend the time it takes. But I will also say that, that's time that I would spend worrying about what we're going to do about electric and gas reliability in LA. So if I fail you, it's because I'm trying hard, not because I don't think it's important to actually build a stronger relationship, to better understand the direction that you're trying to give us, and to weld all the different information and requests and direction that we get from the legislature into something that's coherent and effective for you and for the staff at the PUC and for the public and the ratepayers of the state of California.
I'd like to answer on the operational level. We've done a number of things to make the commission more accountable. We placed on our website, we track every ordering paragraph that we order, that a judge orders. We assign it to an individual employee. We track the compliance of each of those ordering paragraphs. We now post on our website track every advice letter for a tariff change. We track how long they are. You can sort them by vintaging. We look into that. We do the same for open proceedings. And we just recently hired a risk and compliance officer who now serves to track each external audit to make sure that the Commission complies. So we're taking a number of operational steps in support of both the accountability and transparency. We've also redesigned our website to make it more accessible. We've done a lot of things on the ground. There's a lot more work to do, but we are doing them bit by bit.
Well, if we're firm with you when we talk about things like ex-parte communication and the other transparency reforms that have been proposed, it's because we see transparency and accountability as central roles in our oversight of the PUC. And I think that it wouldn't be overstating to say that everyone on this dais is committed to working with you to achieve those goals. So let's please work together. And my hope is that when you're sitting in that chair a year from now, we'll have a lot more achievements in terms of transparency and accountability to point to than we have this year.
Yeah, actually, in our annual report, just to let you know, we tracked each piece of legislation that you passed, and we tracked our ability to implement it and what we've done. We are trying to move into an accountability framework. We've also had workshops with all our employees focusing on core values, two of which are accountability and open communications. So we're making these steps. We do have some concrete achievements, but obviously we still have a long way to go.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank both of you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank the public for listening and for your good questions, and of course, members of this panel for another thorough hearing. And we look forward to talking with you again in the next few months and as things come up. So, thank you very much.